Good afternoon. This is Cecilia with Kentucky Rose Devotionals, where we're finding the roses in the Word of God. And we're finishing up our Book of Ruth series, which is Hope That Stays. And I hope that yesterday blessed you. If this has been blessing you, please like, share, and subscribe. We would love to have you be a part of our ministry and reaching the lost for Jesus. And so we're going to finish out the Book of Ruth today. And there's so many wonderful points in this last chapter of this little book that is full of so much of God's love for us and His provision for us, His way for us, no matter where we've gone, no matter what we've done, no matter how far you think you've run. You cannot not ever outrun the provision or the love and faithfulness of God. So we're going to look at chapter 4 of Ruth, and this will finish out. We know that yesterday we really looked at in the third book, the third chapter of Ruth, the submission that was involved here on Ruth's part, but also the leadership that had to be there in this man of integrity, that man of valor that he was, that Boaz was, and also versus Ruth, who was a woman of valor, and those characteristics, those qualities that both of them possessed, that made them choice servants of God, for Him to choose them. And so, there's so many things that we can get from this, especially women and men. When we talk about that word submission, it's always women don't like to hear that word because they may not have a person in their life that they feel like that they could trust to that level that Ruth trusts Boaz, that you could trust them with your care, you could trust them with the godly leadership that they were doing. And I think that's the key to submission. If you have someone you can trust, that loves you and has your best interests at heart, it's not hard to submit to a person like that. And we can learn from that. Men can learn from that in Boaz, that it was easy for Ruth to submit her love to him because she saw the godly leadership in him. She saw the care that he had for her. She saw the love, the selfless love that he had for her. She saw the concern. She saw the care that he had. He really proved his character to her beforehand, before it was ever a thought that, this might be my kinsman redeemer. She was willing and humbly submitting herself at his feet out of her love for him, out of her respect for him. And, like I said, it's not hard for a woman to submit to a man like that, because you know that he is looking out for your best interest. He wasn't trying to treat Ruth like a slave or a piece of property. He was treating her with love and kindness, just the way Christ treats us. So that's the simple part to this. When you look at it and you're looking for these things in a mate, women, and husbands that are looking, or men that are looking for a wife, we should look for these godly characteristics in the people that we want to spend the rest of our life with. And if you don't see these things beforehand, it's pretty certain you're not going to see them afterwards. So we need to be in God's covenant first for ourselves with God, and because nothing's going to work right in your life if you're not in covenant with the Lord. No relationship you get into is going to be good. It won't be, because without God at the center of what you're doing, you'll never really know what love really is, because His love is just like what we've talked about. This whole chapter, this whole book of Ruth is about God's love for us, that pursues us, that leads us, that guides us, that cares for us, that shows compassion to us when we don't deserve it. All of these things are God's love for us, and those are the same characteristics that we should be showing and exhibiting to our ones that we love, whether they be family members or your spouse, or maybe someone that you're even thinking about marrying. If they're not exhibiting these characteristics of Christ beforehand, if it doesn't line up with God's word of what real love is, look at 1 Corinthians 13. I examined that hard before I ever made a decision to get married myself, and I waited a while. I waited a long time. I waited on God because I wanted my decision to be the right one. And I can say now, I'm almost coming up on my anniversary here in just a few days. 20 years later, I made the right choice because God was with us. We both loved God, and that love for God drew us to one another. And that's exactly what God wants to do for each one of you watching today. If you're not feeling that, if you're not feeling that secure, confident, compassionate, gracious, willing to give kind of love and not take, because some people, all they want to do is take from you. But God's love gives. God's love is generous. God's love is there for you. And so, that's the things that we want to look for. So let's dig into chapter 4 and let's see what we can glean out of chapter 4, because we know that Boaz now knows that there is another near kinsman, right? He's told Ruth about this, and he says, I've got to meet with him and see and make sure that he doesn't want to claim his right first. So again, remember I was telling you ladies, a man should not want to claim his right to you until it is bound by covenant. And the same thing is true for a man. A woman should not want to claim you as her own until you've got that covenant relationship. You've got that ring on your finger, that covenant between you and God and that other one that you're in love with, that three-strand cord that cannot be easily broken. That's what good marriages are built on. So it says Boaz was this kinsman redeemer, but he's looking to one who is the nearer kinsman, because he did not want to be out of order. He didn't want to be improper in what he was doing here. He wanted everything to be done in the order that God would have it be, because when we do things God's way, it's blessed. When we do things against God's word, it's not blessed. So Boaz wanted to be sure, as a man of integrity, as a mighty man of valor, he wanted to know that he was in the will of God. So we see here at verse 1 that he went up to the gate. Now the gate is where most business went on in ancient Israel. So if you were at the gate, that was usually the men of the city. They were always kind of around that area. It was almost like the judicial system of the city. Those men, elders, would gather at the city gate, and they would be there to settle disputes between people, because at that time there wasn't anybody to really do that. So the elders were the ones who would do that. So Boaz is pretty clever here. He's sitting here at the gate, and I don't believe it's by chance that this near kinsman happens to walk by at the same time that he's there in the presence of all these witnesses. And Boaz is very wise, and he does exactly what he should do here. So he sits down, and behold, here comes that kinsman that he was talking to Ruth about. And so he says, wait a minute, such a one. Turn aside. Sit down here. And he turned aside and he sat down. And he said to the 10 men of the elders of the city, sit ye down here, and they sat down. So he was going to have witnesses to what was happening. Anytime that you're speaking to someone and you may be a little unsure on how they're going to take what you're going to say, it's always good to have a group of witnesses around to witness and to know what's being said, so that somebody can't go back and say, well, they said this or they said this. You should always be able to defend yourself. You should always be there surrounded by people that are impartial, that are listening to what's going on. That's biblical, and that's the way things should be done. Sadly, they're not always done that way. Verse number 3. He said to the kinsman Naomi, this is come again out of the country of Moab. She selleth parcel of land, which was her brother Elimelech's. And I thought to advertise thee, saying, buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, then tell me, and let me know, for there is none to redeem it besides thee, and I am after you. And he said, I will redeem it. When it was just a matter of property, anybody wants to have more land or more property. So this guy was like, yeah, I'm in. I want the property. Give me the property. So, he's sitting here at the city gate. The elders are listening to Boaz. They're listening to him tell all this, and so here they are, and he's saying, if you want this property, redeem it. He starts that way. Verse 5, it says that Boaz said, what day would you buy us the field of the hand? When you do this, you're going to get Naomi, must buy it also, the Ruth of the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. So now he's informing him, you can have the land, but just realize that when you get the land, you get Ruth with it too. Well, whoa, this changes everything now. Who's this Ruth? This kinsman wants to know, who's this? And the kinsman says, I cannot redeem it for myself. He backs out. Lest I mar my own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. So, basically what he's saying is, he was either married or he had grown sons, that he had an inheritance that he did not want to ruin, because if he had taken Ruth, then that was going to ruin the inheritance of his real children. So he's saying, I can't do this. I could have taken the land, but I'm not going to take on a wife, because either he already had one, or if she was dead, he didn't want the inheritance taken away from his children that he currently had that were probably grown. So, the city gate, everything was happening there. The elders were listening to this conversation between Boaz and this nearest kinsman who is not named. And I think he's not named because he did not do what he should have done, which was take this offer. And because he didn't take the offer, we don't know who he was. He didn't mention him. He wasn't willing. He wasn't willing to realize that he needed to help this brother out. He didn't want to help this brother. When I say brother, I'm talking about Elimelech's name to carry on. He wasn't willing to do that. He wasn't willing to make that sacrifice. He was not willing to be the kinsman redeemer. So, and here's how this went. If every 50 years, if land had been exchanged between a tribe, or it had been sold, or the family had lost their land, then every 50 years that land had to be returned to the original owner. That was God's law in Leviticus 25. You can look that up. But if you had a kinsman redeemer, then that person could redeem the land earlier than 50 years. So thank goodness for that way that God made, because otherwise some people would have died without ever seeing that promise made to their family that that land be returned. So Boaz begins with the property. He says, are you willing to redeem it? The man says, yes, I'll redeem it. And then Boaz is really clever and finally shares, well, it's not just the land that is involved now, it's Ruth as well, and you've got to marry her. And she's got to be able to bear children to carry on this name. So there were two duties to be fulfilled here. There's the duty of property, but there's also the duty of posterity. And so when we're talking about posterity, we're talking about the children. There needs to be children to carry on this name of this family so that they don't die out. And this is where he declines. He says, I can't redeem it. I'm going to ruin my own inheritance. So then we see here at verse 7, we're going to see an exchange that takes place here, an exchange. He says, now this was the manner in the former time in Israel concerning redeeming and concerning changing. For to confirm all things, a man took off his shoe, and he gave it to his neighbor, and this was the testimony in Israel. So he says, therefore the kinsman said unto Boaz, I'll buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. So Boaz took off his shoe and said, I'll be the one to redeem Ruth and this property. And so Boaz said to the elders and to the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought all that is Elimelech's and all that was Shilon's and Mahlon's of the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that in the name of the dead not be cut off from among his brethren and from the gate of this place. You are witnesses this day. So this is very important. Very important that we have witnesses for what we're doing. When we get saved, and we declare it, and we're supposed to do that. We're supposed to overcome by the word of our testimony. So when you get saved, you need to have that opportunity when you've received salvation to say, I testify among all these people, among the witnesses that are here in this church today. Or if you are at home and you get saved, you call someone up. You want people to witness, to know the change that's happened to you. You have exchanged sin for righteousness. You have exchanged death for life, eternal. So this is an exchange that's taking place, and this exchange that took place here was among all these witnesses, and he gives his shoe as a testament of this deal that has been made, this agreement. That was your bond, to make this exchange. It was a done deal. There was nothing else to do, and it was witnessed in front of all these people. So he makes this announcement and explains this to everyone. And it says, all the people at verse 11 were in the gate, and the elders, and they said, we are witnesses. And then they give out a blessing. They say, the Lord make the woman, they're talking about Ruth, that is to come into thine house like Rachel and Leah. Fruitful, basically, they're wanting her to be. Which two did build the house of Israel. These were the two mothers of Israel. And they did it worthily, it says. and make a name to be famous in Bethlehem. And that's exactly what God does. Exactly what he does. Verse 12, and let thy house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore unto Judah of the seed, which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. So they were already declaring blessing, and they were already declaring the blessing of a child to be born out of this covenant, out of this promise. This is why God's covenant promise is only between a man and a woman. Two women can't have a baby. Two men can't have a baby. But a man and a woman, when they're together, they can conceive and they can make a child. And this is God's promise. This is how God's plan continues on. Think about if we lived in a world where there were no men and women married. what we've done, but because God is a faithful God. This first child is born, and it's just the beginning of blessings, but it's the evidence that God has blessed your union. God blesses us with children. They're our blessing. They're our gift, and He will do that for those who are sold out to Him, those that choose Him over everything else. His favor, His covenant, it's powerful. Naomi was blessed. Ruth was blessed. Boaz was blessed, all because Naomi said, I'm going home. I'm going back to the will of God. I'm not going to continue going down this road that is leading me farther and farther away from the promises of God. I'm going home. And I think that's what somebody needs to hear today. Go home. Go home to the promises of God. He wants you to go home. He's ready. He's waiting for you to come home. All because she was in a crisis. It got her attention, didn't it? She lost it all. Sometimes we have to lose it all to realize what we really have. I can tell you this for a fact. Sometimes you do. You have to go full circle to realize, to come around and realize that's what God wanted for me. And I missed it. So now, because God's so gracious, because He's so faithful, He's going to bring you right back to where you need to be to get back on that road. It may not be easy, but it'll be worth it. It'll be worth it. It'll be beyond what you expect, because God, Romans 8:28, works all things for the good of those who love Him and those who are called according to His perfect purposes. He works it all for your good. Doesn't mean all good happens to you. It just means that what does happen, even if it's bad, God takes it and He can turn it for good if you'll let Him have it. That's the key. Let Him have it. Look what God did. Look what God did through this line. Do you know who Boaz's father was? His father was Salmon. And if you look at this, if you look at the genealogy, keep reading to the end of the book of Ruth, you're going to see the name Salmon. Salmon was married to Rahab. Now put this together. Isn't this wonderful? Rahab the harlot. Okay? This is David's genealogy. There was a harlot. There was a pagan lady. You know, look at all this. God uses imperfect people. It's amazing what God does. Salmon and Rahab bore Boaz. And then here comes another, another pagan. Rahab was a pagan. She was a harlot. And God turned her around and used her. And look at what Boaz got. I bet his mom was kind of laughing. Wow, God has an amazing sense of humor. He has an amazing sense of purpose for each one of us. Even when we think we're completely lost and completely gone. He didn't lose sight of the harlot. He didn't lose sight of the pagan girl. And He won't lose sight of you. He's got us. He's got us if we'll just keep walking with Him today. So I'm going to close with this. Jesus, who was in this whole book as Boaz, our kinsman redeemer. Look at the characteristics of Boaz and you're going to see Jesus all in him. Okay, he had to be a kinsman redeemer, had to be a family member. So Jesus took on flesh for you and me so that He could become our family member. He could become a human like us to save us. Kinsman redeemer had the duty of bringing family members out of slavery by buying them. Jesus redeemed you and me from slavery and sin and death with His life. The kinsman redeemer had a duty to buy back the land that was forfeited. See, Jesus redeemed the earth. He redeemed the land of this earth and mankind when we were sold over to Satan. He released us. He bought the land. He said, it is finished. He was motivated to do all this for you because He loved you. And just as Boaz loved Ruth and he had a plan to redeem her, God had a plan from the very beginning to redeem us through His Son, Jesus Christ. A plan that seemed crazy and foolish. Why would any man lay down his life and die on a cross? But His plan was perfect. And it worked. Because He was divine and He was human. He was the only one who could be what we need today. So whatever you're looking for, whatever you need, you will find it in the name of the kinsman redeemer, Goel, who is Jesus Christ. He's got what you need today. Stop walking down the road to Moab and turn around. And whatever it takes, whatever you have to do, if you have to buy a moving truck and do it by yourself, whatever you have to do, wherever you are, if you're not in the will of God and you know you're headed down the road to Moab, All it takes is for you to turn around and start heading back home to the house of bread, back to the house where God knows everything you need when you need it. God bless you. See you soon. Have a wonderful holiday weekend, and we'll see you